An Introduction to Microsoft Cognitive Services. I'm Michael Washington. In today's agenda, we'll first cover what are Microsoft Cognitive Services. We'll then show how to get started using Microsoft Cognitive Services and cover how much it costs. We'll then cover the Language Understanding Intelligence Service, or LUIS for short, and we'll demonstrate creating an application that enrolls students. Next, we'll cover the Computer Vision API. We'll cover an application that allows you to upload documents for students. Next on the list is a Text Analytics API. We'll create an application called a Poor Man Q&A Maker. Next, we'll cover the official Microsoft Cognitive Services Q&A Maker, and we'll show how to use the Q&A Maker to easily create and consume a chatbot. Finally, we'll show how to programmatically update a Q&A Maker service using the Q&A Maker API. The Microsoft Cognitive Services consist of a number of APIs, most of which are shown here. Getting started. To get started using Microsoft Cognitive Services, go to microsoft.com/cognitive-services and create an account and sign in. Once you sign in, you can get the keys needed to access the various APIs. Shown here is how you retrieve the API key needed to get to the Computer Vision Preview API. Pricing. In this diagram, we'll show the pricing for the APIs that we'll cover in this presentation. The first column shows the API. The second column shows the various SKUs and plans available for each API. Some APIs, like the Q&A Maker at the bottom, only have a free plan at the moment because it's still in preview. The next column covers plan limits, and the final column shows the price for the particular plan. Language Understanding Intelligence Service, or LUIS for short, will demonstrate creating an enrolling students application. The application we'll create allows you to type in a normal human sentence, and the first name, the last name, the class, and the period will be parsed out. You can type in an alternate sentence, and it will also be parsed. You can access LUIS through the Microsoft Cognitive Services website. Once you're on the LUIS website, you can create a new application, give the application a name, and click the Create button. You will then be taken to the dashboard. Next, you'll click the Entities, and you'll start adding your custom entities. First, we'll create a student name entity. We'll make it hierarchical because it will be composed of a child first name and a child last name. Next, we'll create a simple entity for period. Also, we'll create a simple entity for class. Next, we'll start adding intents. We'll click the Add Intent button, and we'll call our intent Enroll. Now we'll start typing utterances. These are the sample sentences that will trigger our entity. After entering an utterance, we will then map the words in the utterance to the entities that we created earlier. Here we're mapping the first name of the student entity to John. We'll complete mapping the utterance. We'll then enter at least 10 more utterances and do the mapping. We can switch between entity view and token view by changing the drop-down. After we have entered at least 10 utterances, we then save them. We can also use feature list. In this case, we're making a phrase list for classes. This helps LUIS understand what a class is. Here, we've created a feature list for classes, first names, last names, and periods. Finally, we will train and test the application by clicking the Train Application button. We can then test the performance of LUIS by entering utterances. If the performance is not good enough, we can go back and create more utterances and do more mapping to help train LUIS better. Finally, we will publish the application. At this point, we have to select an endpoint key If we do not have one, we have to click the button to switch over to Azure to obtain a key. After doing this, we click the Publish button. Let's see a demonstration. We'll go to the Lewis site and we'll click the My Apps button and then select New App. To create a new application, we'll first give it a name, and we'll also give it a description. Next, we will choose an endpoint key. If we do not have one, we can get one from Azure.com. The first thing we do is go to Entities. We click the Add Custom Entity button, and we create our first entities. We will create a student name entity, and we will set it as hierarchical because it will be composed of 2 children. We'll click the Add Child button and enter first name as the first child and last name as the second child. We'll click the Add Custom Entity button again, and this time we'll create a simple entity called period. We'll create another entity that's also a simple entity called class. Now we will set up our intents. We will click the Add Intent button to create our first intent, which is enroll. We will then enter an utterance that will trigger the intent. Next, we will click on each word in the utterance and map it to our entities. We're mapping John to the first name entity, and Doe, which is his last name, to the student name last name entity. We will then map English to the class, and the number 5 to the period. Now we'll enter a new utterance, and we will then follow the same process of mapping the various words to our entities. So in this case, the word to is being mapped to period, and the student first name and last name are being mapped. Enter at least 10 utterances, the more the better. Save them and then click the Train and Test link. This will take you to the Train and Test page, and you'll click the Train Application button. Now we can enter utterances and see the performance of the application. Next, we'll click the Publish App link, which will take us to the Publish page. We can get a new endpoint key if we don't have one, or select our existing one. We'll then click the Publish button. We will now create an ASP.NET application from our Lewis service. On the Lewis website, you can retrieve the Lewis URL and subscription key. Copy these down, you'll need them later. Copy the entire endpoint URL and then append to the end of it a sample utterance. Paste this in a web browser. You will then receive a JSON file back. Save this file, open it up, and copy the contents. Go to JSONUTILS.com, paste the contents of the JSON, and you'll receive C# classes back. Copy these down. We'll then open up Visual Studio and create a new project. We'll create an ASP.NET web application. We'll use the MVC template. We'll then go into the NuGet package manager and install the Newton JSON package. We'll also go to Add References and add a reference to system.net.http. We'll open up the web.config and we'll enter our Lewis URL and subscription key. We'll then create a models folder and add a class. We'll call the class Lewis, and we'll paste in the contents from the JSON UTILS site. We'll also add a class for query, which will contain the first name, last name, class, and period. We'll alter the index file to have the simple UI that was shown earlier. Next, we'll alter the home controller to alter the index controller method to take a simple search string, which is the utterance, and call the query Lewis method that will return the entities. This is the code for the query Lewis method. As you see, it simply retrieves the Lewis URL and subscription key from the web.config and then passes the utterance to the service, retrieves the entities, and passes them back. Let's see a demonstration. Back on the Lewis site, we can select the endpoint URL and copy it. We'll then paste it into a web browser with a sample utterance at the end. We'll receive back the contents of a JSON file. We'll then copy this contents. We'll then go to the JSON Untitled.com website. We'll select the text for the JSON box and replace it with our own. Next, we'll make our class name Lewis and we'll click the box to add a namespace. We'll then click Submit. The website will then return C# classes that we can use for our program. We'll then click the Copy button to copy the code. In Visual Studio, we'll select File, New Project to create a new project. We will create an ASP.NET web application and we'll call it Lewis Enroll Student. We'll select the MVC template. The project will be created. We will then select the Package Manager console, and on the Package Manager console line we'll type install package Newtonsoft JSON. This will parse the results that we get back from the Lewis service. The package will install. Next, we'll go into the web.config and we will add the keys for our Lewis URL and subscription key. We'll programmatically retrieve those in the controller that we'll create later. Next, in the models folder, we'll create a class. We'll call this class Lewis. When it opens up in the editor, we'll select the text, remove it, and paste in the text that we received from the JSON UTLS website. We'll also create a query class to hold the response back from the Lewis website. We'll then go into the views and go to the index page and remove the default text and replace it with our UI. We'll go ahead and save this. Finally, we'll go into the home controller and we'll replace the index method with our custom method. Our custom method will call our query Lewis method. We'll go ahead and paste this in. This is the method that will actually call the Lewis site. Notice it has code to retrieve the Lewis URL and subscription key from the web.config. We'll now go ahead and fix some of our build issues by adding our using statements, including systemthreading.task, and at the bottom we'll need a using statement for the Newtonsoft JSON. After all our build errors have been cleared, we'll go ahead and save the page, close it, and then we'll run the application. The web browser will show, and we can type in an utterance, click the search button, and the utterance will then be parsed. Computer Vision API Student Uploads. We'll demonstrate an application that allows us to upload a document that contains a student's name and automatically associate that document to the student in the database. To run the application, we'll open up the web.config and enter our Vision API subscription key. We'll run the application. When we check student documents, we see that there's already a number of students. If we click the Home button and then click Select File, we can upload a document that contains a student's name. The document will automatically be associated with the student. We can then return to the student documents section, select the student, and see the document. We can then click on the document to retrieve it. Let's see a demonstration. Let's see what that looks like. First, we're showing what the code looks like in Visual Studio. We can then select Debug, Start Without Debugging, to run the application. When it opens up in the web browser, we can click the Select File and select a picture of myself holding a piece of paper that has my name printed on it. Next, we'll click the Upload button, which will send it to the service to be OCR'd and processed. The document, the picture, has now been associated with my student record. When we click on Student Documents and select my name from the drop-down, we see the picture has been associated. We can click on it to open it. Looking at the code, we first start off with a server-side method that allows us to upload a file, pass it to the Vision Service client, which then OCRs the document and returns an OCR text. This is passed to a method that loops through the regions and lines and creates a single string, which is the OCR text that it found. It passes this to the client-side JavaScript, which then takes the values and calls a parse and set student method. This method searches for the text student name : If found, it assumes that what is ever after that is the student's name. If it finds that, it then calls the other client-side JavaScript method, search for student. This method prepares to make a server-side call to search for the student in the database. The server-side method searches for the student, and if found, returns the student and the student's ID. The client-side JavaScript now has all the information it needs: the student's ID, the document location. It then makes another server-side call to save the results to associate the document with the student. The server-side code then saves the document for the student in the database. Text Analytics API, a poor man Q&A maker. We're going to demonstrate an application that allows us to ask a question, have that question passed to the Text Analytics API, have the key phrases extracted, and then matched against other key phrases in the database to find another question whose has those matching key phrases. This usually allows a person to ask a question and receive an answer that's appropriate to the question. When we run the application, we first, in the web.config, enter the subscription key of the Text Analytics API. We'll then open up the database, show table data, and add new question and answer pairs. We'll then run the application, click the Update Database button. What will happen next is those questions and answers will be submitted to the Text Analytics API and their key phrases will be extracted. If we then go into the database and look in the key phrases database table, we will see the key phrases and we will see that they are associated with their question and answer pair. Now, when we run the application and we ask a question, we usually find an appropriate answer. Let's see a demonstration. In Visual Studio, we'll go into the App Data folder and we'll go and open up the database. We'll then expand the Tables node and we'll open the Question and Answers table. We'll show the table data. We'll then widen the columns here so that we can kind of see what we're doing, and we'll enter a sample question with an answer. Now you'll notice that the process column for this new question and answer is set to false. We'll then run the application, and after it displays, we'll click the Update Database button. we'll see that one record has now been updated. So what happened here is that question and answer has been sent to the service to have its key phrases parsed out. So now when we look in the key phrases table and we show table data, and we'll scroll down to the bottom, we'll see that the key phrase that was pulled out was the word tutorials, and that's associated with question number 15, question and answer pair number 15. So now when we run the application and we type in a sentence whose key phrase is tutorials, it will pull up our question and answer. When we look at the UI, we see that there's a simple Update Database button, an Ask Question button, and a text box to enter a question and a display of the answer that it found. When the Update Database button is clicked, the Update Database method runs. This method searches through the database for unprocessed questions and answers. It then takes the contents of those questions and answers and passes them to the Text Analytics API to extract the key phrases. This is the method that calls the Text Analytics API to receive the key phrases. Those key phrases are then saved to the database and associated with the question and answer pair. When a question is asked, the contents of the question is also passed to the Text Analytics API to extract the key phrases. This method then searches through the database for other matching key phrases and then finds the question and answer pair that have the highest matching key phrases. That answer for that question and answer pair is what is returned as the answer. Q&A Maker, available at qandamaker.ai or through the Microsoft Cognitive Services website. Using Q&A Maker to easily create and consume a chatbot. When you access the Q&A Maker website, you'll have the option of creating a new service. You'll give the service a name, and you'll then have the option of pointing to a website that contains question and answers. You'll then click the Create button. The Q&A Maker service will scan the website for the questions and answers and import them into the knowledge base. You can then test the knowledge base by entering a question and it will attempt to find the correct answer. You can also correct the Q&A Maker to help train it to find the best answer. When you're done, click the Save and Retrain button and click the Publish button. This will take you to the Publish screen. You'll then click the Publish button again. It will then show you the URL that you call to access the service, along with your subscription key. You can also get to this by going to Settings, and it will display under Deployment Details. Let's see a demonstration. At the Q&A Maker website, we can click the button to create a new service. We'll give the service a name, Azure Support. We'll then point to the Azure Support Frequently Asked Questions website. We'll then scroll down to the bottom and click the Create button. The questions and answers from the web page will be automatically imported into the knowledge base. In this case, it found 49 question and answer pairs. We can then click the Test button. A screen will display that will allow us to type in questions and it will show us the answers. We'll have the option of entering alternative answers or helping the computer by picking other answers that it should have chosen. We'll then click the Save and Retrain button. After this has been completed, we'll click the Publish link. This will take us to the Publish page. We'll then click the Publish button. After it's been published, we'll see the URL to call the service. We'll now create an application using the Q&A Maker service we created. We'll first open up Visual Studio. We'll create a new project. We'll create an ASP.NET Core Web Application project, and we'll use the Web Application template. We'll return to the Q&A Maker service website and select My Services and then View Code. This will give us access to the knowledge base ID and the subscription key. Save those, we'll need those later. We'll return back to Visual Studio and open the app-settings.json file and enter our subscription key and the knowledge base ID. We'll then create two classes, one custom settings to hold the knowledge base and subscription key, and a Q&A query class. We'll go into the startup class and register the custom settings class to retrieve the knowledge base ID and the subscription key. We'll go into the home controller, add some needed using statements, and in the constructor we will retrieve the subscription key and the knowledge base ID. In the index we will receive a search string and pass it to our query Q&A bot method. In the query Q&A bot method, we'll call the Cognitive Services Q&A bot service to take the query and return an appropriate answer. We'll then go into the index page, delete the current contents, and replace them with our simple UI. When we run the application, we can then enter a question and receive an appropriate answer. Let's see a demonstration. We'll open up Visual Studio. We'll select New Project. We're going to create an ASP.NET Core web application. We'll call this application Q&A Bot. We'll click OK. We'll then select the web application template. We'll click OK again, and the project will then be created. The first thing we'll do is open up the app settings JSON file, and we'll put in the settings for our subscription key and our knowledge base ID. We'll then programmatically retrieve those. We'll create a models folder, and we'll add two classes to it: custom settings to hold our custom settings, and Q&A query to hold the question that's being asked and the answers that are being returned. Because this is an ASP.NET Core application that uses dependency injection, we have to go into the startup folder and add a services configured method to invoke it to pull up our custom settings so that we can retrieve them in our controller. We'll then go into the home controller, and in the constructor we'll retrieve the custom settings and set them to a private variable. We also have to add some using statements. Now we'll replace the index method with our custom method, which takes a search string and then passes it to our query Q&A bot method. We'll then implement that query Q&A bot method. This is the method that calls the Q&A service. We'll then add some using statements that are required, things like system.net HTTP and system.txt. After all our build issues have been cleared, we'll go ahead and we'll save the page and close it. We'll then go into the Views index page, and we'll remove the default markup and replace it with our custom markup that allows us to enter a question and receive an answer. We'll go ahead and save that, close the page, and then we'll run the application. The web browser will then open. We can then type in a question, hit submit, and receive an appropriate answer. Programmatically updating a Q&A Maker service using the Q&A Maker API. We will now demonstrate an application that allows you to programmatically add questions and remove questions from the Q&A Maker knowledge base. You can click the Get Fact button to retrieve the entire knowledge base. You can enter a new question and answer and click the Add Entry button to add a new question and answer. When we go to the Q&A Maker website and look at the knowledge base, we see that the question and answer have been added. However, if we click the Get Fact button, we'll find out that the question and answer will not show up. The The reason why is we first have to click the Train and Publish button. After that, when we click the Get Fact button, the question and answer will show up. To delete a question, we simply enter the exact question and answer and click the Delete Entry button. Let's see a demonstration. In Visual Studio, we can run the application by selecting Debug, Start Without Debugging. The web browser will open. We can then enter a new question and an answer, and then click the Add Entry button. After doing this, if we then return to the Q&A Maker website and select Knowledge Base, we see that the question and answer have been added to the knowledge base. However, if we click the Get FAQ button and we open up the resulting CSV file in Excel, we see that it actually has not been added to the database. If we click the Train and Publish button and then click the Get FAQ button and then open up the CSV file in Excel, and then we scroll down to the bottom, we see that now it is considered added to the knowledge base database. If we now ask a question that will invoke that answer, we now see that it can be retrieved. To remove a question and answer pair, we can enter the exact question and answer, click the Delete Entry, Train and Publish, and then when we click the Get FAQ button, we see that it has been removed from the knowledge base. To call the Q&A Maker Service API, on the Q&A Maker Service website, we select Documentation and then click the API link. In our application, the Get Fact button calls the Get Fact method. This method calls the Q&A Maker Service API and receives a TSV file. It then loops through the TSV file to create a comma-separated value file. The Add Entry and Delete Entry buttons call a method that determines if we're adding or deleting, and it calls a common method, Update Query Q&A Bot method. This method creates Q&A pair parameters indicating whether we're adding or deleting a question. This calls a common method that is a patch method that will then call the Q&A API to add or delete the question pair. The Train and Publish button simply calls an API method that will then train and update the database. All the resources, files, and walkthroughs and the forums are available on aihelpwebsite.com. Thank you.